My mother left me one last letter. She said if I ever lost everything, I should find you.
The winter of 1893 arrived early in the mountains outside Livingston, Montana. Snow covered the valley long before Thanksgiving, and the wind carried the kind of cold that settled into a man's bones for days. Ranchers hurried to stack hay. Travelers stayed close to town. Anyone with sense avoided lonely roads after sunset. But on one gray afternoon, a young woman walked those frozen roads completely alone. Her name was Emma Carter. She was 25 years old, carrying a single worn leather suitcase in one hand and a folded letter tucked safely inside her coat. It was the last thing her mother had ever written before dying from pneumonia only 10 days earlier. Emma had read the letter so many times the paper had begun to soften at the edges. If the world ever leaves you with nowhere to go, find Elias Walker. He once saved my life, and if he is still the man I remember, he will never turn away someone who truly needs help. Emma had never heard that name before. Her mother had spoken little about her younger years. Now there was no one left to ask. She stopped at the edge of a lonely ranch where smoke drifted from a stone chimney. A weather-beaten wooden sign swung slowly in the wind. Walker Ranch. She swallowed hard. This was her last chance. If this man refused her, there would be nowhere else to go. She walked through the gate, her boots crunching across the frozen ground. Before she reached the porch, the sound of an axe echoed across the yard. A tall man stepped out from behind a woodpile. He looked about 38, broad shoulders, dark hair touched with frost, a heavy work coat. His beard was trimmed short, and his gray eyes watched everything without revealing anything. He wasn't handsome in the polished way city men were. He looked like the mountains themselves, hard, quiet, unmoving. He rested the axe against a chopping block but didn't come closer. "What do you need?" he asked calmly. Emma's throat tightened. I'm looking for Elias Walker." "I am." She reached into her coat and carefully unfolded the letter. "My mother asked me to find you." For the first time, something changed in his expression, only slightly. "What was your mother's name?" "Margaret Carter." The color left his face. He stared at the letter for several long seconds before taking it from her hands. His rough fingers trembled almost too slightly to notice. He read every word. Then he folded the paper with extraordinary care. "When did she pass?" 10 days ago." He looked toward the distant mountains. Neither of them spoke. Finally, he whispered, "She was my best friend before life carried us different directions." Emma blinked. "My mother never told me that." "I'm not surprised." The wind howled across the empty fields. Elias looked back at her suitcase. "You walked here, nearly 12 miles. In this weather?" "I couldn't afford the stagecoach." His eyes dropped to her boots. One sole had nearly separated from the leather. Without another question, he stepped onto the porch and opened the cabin door. "The fire's warm." Emma hesitated. "I don't want charity." He looked at her with the same calm expression. "This isn't charity. It's honoring a promise I never knew I still owed." For the first time since her mother's funeral, Emma felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel: hope. She stepped inside. The cabin was simple: a stone fireplace, one long table, books stacked neatly beside an oil lamp. Everything had a purpose. Nothing was wasted. Elias poured hot coffee into a tin cup and placed it in front of her. "You should eat first," he said. "Questions can wait." Emma wrapped both hands around the warm cup. She hadn't realized how cold she truly was until that moment. Outside, snow continued to fall across the silent Montana valley. Neither of them knew. that someone watching from the ridge had already seen Emma arrive. And by sunrise, everything about Walker Ranch would begin to change.
Emma had expected to stay only one night. The next morning, she packed her suitcase before sunrise, determined not to overstay her welcome. When Elias walked in from feeding the horses, he found her standing by the door. "I'm grateful for your kindness," she said softly. "I'll head back to Livingston. I'll find work somewhere." Elias set his gloves on the table. "Doing what?" She hesitated. "I'll figure something out." He looked at her for a long moment. "No one figures anything out in Montana with winter this deep." Emma lowered her eyes. "I can't expect you to carry my burdens. You aren't." He walked to a shelf, pulled out a worn ledger, and placed it in front of her. "I can raise cattle. I can repair fences. I can survive a blizzard." He paused. "But I can't keep books worth a damn." Emma opened the ledger. The pages were filled with crooked numbers, unpaid invoices, and forgotten supply orders. "You've been running the ranch like this?" "For 6 years." She almost smiled. "You've lost money." "I suspected as much. For a man who works this hard, you should have twice what you own." Elias shrugged. "I've never cared much about money. I only cared about keeping the ranch." Emma carefully closed the ledger. "I can fix this. I know." Those 2 simple words caught her off guard. "You've known me less than a day. I trusted your mother. That's enough." For reasons she couldn't explain, those words mattered more than any promise. By the end of the week, Walker Ranch looked different. Emma reorganized every account. She negotiated lower prices with the feed supplier in town. She found forgotten receipts worth nearly $200. Even the kitchen felt warmer. For the first time in years, fresh bread cooled on the windowsill while beef stew simmered over the stove. Elias never complained before. Now he quietly found himself eating 2 bowls every evening. "You cook like your mother?" he asked one night. Emma smiled. She believed hungry people make poor decisions. Smart woman. The smartest I've ever known. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Peaceful. The following Saturday they drove into Livingston for supplies. People noticed immediately. The lonely rancher who hadn't brought anyone to town in nearly 5 years was walking beside a young woman. Whispers followed them across the boardwalk. Most were harmless. One wasn't. Standing outside the Mercantile was Silas Granger, the wealthiest ranch owner in the valley. Tall, expensively dressed, always smiling, never kindly. His eyes drifted from Emma to Elias. "So the rumors are true," he said. "I wondered how long it would take before someone convinced you that living alone wasn't practical." Elias didn't answer. Silas stepped closer. His smile widened. "You picked an interesting time to take in company." Emma noticed it immediately. The conversation wasn't about her. It was about the land. "What do you mean?" she asked. Silas looked at her. "Oh, he hasn't told you." Elias spoke before he could continue. "That's enough." Silas chuckled. "She deserves to know." He tipped his hat and walked away, but not before leaving one final sentence behind. "The railroad surveyors arrive next month, and your ranch sits exactly where they want to build." Emma watched him disappear into the crowd. Then she slowly turned toward Elias. "You knew?" He nodded once. "I've been fighting land offers for almost a year." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want your first peaceful week here filled with worry." She looked across the snowy street toward the distant mountains. Something told her. Silas Granger wasn't interested in buying the ranch. He intended to take it. And Emma suddenly realized. Her mother's letter hadn't simply brought her to a lonely ranch. It had placed her in the middle of a battle that was only just beginning. The railroad surveyors arrived exactly 3 weeks later. 5 men in heavy wool coats rode onto Walker Ranch carrying maps, measuring chains, and polished confidence. They worked from sunrise until afternoon, driving wooden stakes into the frozen ground while making careful notes. Emma watched from the porch. "They're acting like they already own it," she whispered. Elias rested both hands on the fence. "They're waiting for someone else to make that happen." Late that evening, a rider appeared through the falling snow. It was the county clerk. He handed Elias a sealed envelope. Inside was a legal notice. Walker Ranch had 30 days to prove ownership of the eastern meadow, or the land would be transferred under an old railroad development claim. Emma read every line twice. This claim doesn't make sense. It doesn't. It's missing 2 recorded surveys. It is. She looked up sharply. Then why would they file it? Because most people don't know enough to fight it. Emma spread every deed, tax receipt, and property map across the kitchen table. For 2 straight nights, the oil lamp burned until dawn. She compared signatures, measured boundary lines, read decades-old land records. Then suddenly, she stopped. "Elias." He looked up from repairing a saddle. "I found it." She held up a faded survey dated 1874. The railroad's claim used the wrong creek as the property boundary. One surveyor had copied the map incorrectly nearly 20 years earlier. If the original survey could be verified, the entire case would collapse. Elias stared at her. "You just saved the ranch." Emma smiled for the first time in weeks. "Not yet. We still have to prove it." 2 days later, they rode into Livingston before sunrise. The courthouse was crowded. Silas Granger stood near the judge's bench, wearing the same confident smile. When he saw Emma carrying a stack of documents under her arm, that smile faded. The hearing lasted nearly 3 hours. Silas hired the best lawyer in the county. Emma spoke for herself. Calm, prepared, precise. She presented every survey, every tax record, every witness statement. Finally, she unfolded the original boundary map. "The railroad's entire claim," she said quietly, "depends on a survey that never legally existed." The courtroom fell silent. The judge studied the documents for several long minutes. Then he removed his glasses. "The claim against Walker Ranch," he struck the desk once with his gavel, "is dismissed." A wave of relief swept through the room. Silas said nothing. He simply stood, turned, and walked out without looking back. That evening, snow began falling again. Emma and Elias rode home beneath a sky full of stars. Neither of them spoke for miles. At the ranch, Elias climbed down from the wagon and looked toward the house glowing warmly in the darkness. "I've spent 12 years protecting this place alone," he said quietly. "I thought that was strength." He turned toward Emma. "I was wrong." She looked at him. "You didn't save this ranch by yourself today." "No, you saved it." Emma's heart skipped. For the first time, she realized Walker Ranch no longer felt like somewhere she was staying. It felt like home. And for the first time in many years, Elias Walker found himself wondering whether home had always been missing just one person. Winter slowly surrendered to spring. The snow melted from the valley. leaving behind green grass, rushing streams, and the smell of fresh earth. Walker Ranch felt alive again. Emma planted a vegetable garden beside the cabin, while Elias rebuilt the old horse barn that had leaned for years. Life had become peaceful. Until one quiet evening, Emma found her mother's letter tucked inside the family Bible. She read it one last time before placing it back inside the envelope. Elias stepped onto the porch, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You still read it?" "Sometimes." He sat beside her. After a long silence, Emma asked the question that had lived in her heart for months. "Did you love my mother?" Elias looked toward the mountains glowing orange beneath the setting sun. "Yes, I did." Emma waited. "But we were young. I left Montana to earn enough money for a future. When I returned, she had already married your father. There was never any bitterness. Your father was one of the finest men I've ever known." Emma smiled softly. She loved him very much. "I know." Another quiet silence settled between them. Then Elias laughed softly. "Your mother once told me something." Emma looked over. She said, "One day you'll stop trying to survive long enough to start living." He looked at Emma. I never understood what she meant. I think I do now. A week later, the entire town gathered for the annual spring social inside Livingston's community hall. Music filled the room. Children laughed. Neighbors shared food and stories. It was the first time anyone had seen Elias Walker attend in nearly a decade. Whispers spread through the crowd, not because of him, but because of the woman standing beside him. Emma looked happier than anyone remembered. Sheriff Dawson smiled as they walked in. I was beginning to think we'd forgotten what Walker looked like. Even Elias managed a quiet grin. As the fiddle players began another song, Emma watched couples step onto the dance floor. She sighed. "I've never been much of a dancer." "Neither have I," Elias admitted. She laughed. "I don't believe you." He stood and held out his hand. "Then I suppose we'll both embarrass ourselves." She slipped her hand into his. The dance wasn't graceful. They missed steps, turned the wrong direction twice, laughed more than either expected. But somewhere between the music, the laughter, and the warm lights, the distance that had once existed between them quietly disappeared. When the song ended, neither of them let go. Several months later, the first harvest from Emma's garden filled baskets outside the cabin. The ranch was finally profitable. The debts were gone. The fences stood strong. One cool September morning, Elias walked to the hill overlooking the valley. Emma found him there. He was holding a small velvet box. "I've been thinking," he said. She smiled. "That usually means something important." He nodded. "When you first arrived, I gave you a place to stay. But somewhere along the way, you became the reason this place feels like home." He opened the box. Inside rested a simple gold wedding band. "The first promise we made was only on paper. I'd like to make another one, this time because we both choose it." Emma's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness, but from the quiet certainty that she had finally found where she belonged. She slipped the ring onto her finger. "I choose you, Elias. Today, and every day after." He wrapped his arms around her as the autumn wind swept across the Montana hills. Far below, Walker Ranch stood stronger than ever, not because of its fences, not because of its land, but because 2 lonely people had discovered that sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or property. It's the person who helps you believe in home again.